It's a Tuesday night in Seattle. Daniel is sitting at his kitchen table staring at his phone. He just got paid. $6,200 hit his account this morning. For a moment, everything felt fine. Then he opened his banking app again. $4,870 is already gone. Not spent today, just gone. Rent, car payment, insurance, subscriptions he barely remembers signing up for. Nothing unusual, nothing reckless, just a normal life. He leans back, confused, because if you looked at Daniel from the outside, you'd think he's doing well. Stable job, good income, no obvious mistakes. But every month follows the same pattern. Money arrives, and then disappears without ever becoming anything. And the strange part is, Daniel isn't trying to be irresponsible. He's following the exact path he was told would work. So the question isn't, where did the money go? It's, why does it keep happening even when everything looks right? Daniel isn't an outlier. If anything, he's exactly where he was supposed to be. Good education, stable career, consistent income growth. He did what most people are told to do. He didn't take extreme risks. He didn't make reckless financial decisions. He didn't ignore responsibility. And yet, the result feels strangely disconnected from the effort. Because if progress was working the way it's supposed to, something should be building. Something should be accumulating in the background. But for Daniel, nothing is. Every month resets. Every increase disappears into something that feels permanent. And over time, a subtle shift begins to happen. He stops asking how to grow and starts focusing on how to maintain, how to stay current, how to keep up, how to avoid falling behind. Not because he lacks discipline, but because the structure around him keeps converting progress into pressure. And once that shift happens, you're no longer moving forward. You're maintaining position inside a system that doesn't reward movement the way you were told it would. At first, it doesn't look like a problem. Nothing feels broken. The bills are paid, the lifestyle is stable, there's no visible crisis, which is exactly why it goes unnoticed. Because what's happening to Daniel isn't sudden. It doesn't come from one bad decision. It comes from a series of small, reasonable ones that never get reversed. A slightly better apartment, a more reliable car, a few conveniences that save time, a few upgrades that make life feel easier. Individually, they make sense. Collectively, they start to form something else, a structure, one that quietly adjusts every time his income increases, not by force, but by alignment. Each new dollar finds a place to go, not randomly, but predictably, until eventually there's no gap left between what he earns and what his life requires. And that's the part most people never see. They think they're making independent choices, but those choices begin to follow a pattern. And once enough of them stack together, they stop being flexible. They become fixed. And fixed systems don't respond when you need them to. They just continue as they are. The mistake isn't obvious. In fact, it's so common that most people never question it. Daniel doesn't measure progress by what he keeps. He measures it by what he earns. The raise, the bonus, the new number on his paycheck. And every time that number goes up, it feels like movement, like things are working. But there's a difference he's never been taught to see. Income is movement. Wealth is residue. One flows through your life, the other stays behind. And those two things don't respond to the same forces. Because income increases can be absorbed, redirected, expanded into new costs that feel completely justified, a slightly better standard, a slightly higher baseline. And once that baseline moves, it doesn't move back easily. So what Daniel experiences isn't a lack of income, it's a lack of accumulation. Everything he earns is already being matched by something waiting to receive it. And from the outside, it still looks like progress. But underneath, nothing is actually building, just movement, repeated over time. In a system where motion looks like growth, even when it isn't. The shift doesn't happen all at once. It happens when enough decisions stop being optional and start becoming permanent. At some point, Daniel's monthly life stops feeling flexible, not because he chose it that way, but because it slowly became that way. His rent isn't a choice anymore. His car payment isn't something he evaluates. Insurance, subscriptions, utilities, they don't feel like spending. They feel like conditions, things that exist whether he thinks about them or not. And that's where the structure forms, not in what he buys, but in what he can't easily remove. Because every fixed cost does something subtle. It claims a portion of his future income before it even arrives. So by the time he gets paid, part of that money is already gone. Not physically, but structurally, committed. And the more of these commitments stack, the less space remains for anything else. Not saving, not investing, not even adjusting. Because reducing a fixed life is harder than building it. It requires friction, sacrifice, sometimes loss. So most people don't reduce, they adapt. They keep earning to support the structure they've built without realizing the structure itself is what's keeping them in place. The structure holds as long as nothing goes wrong, as long as income is consistent, as long as timing works, as long as life stays predictable. And most of the time it does, until it doesn't. A delayed paycheck, an unexpected repair, a medical bill that wasn't planned. Not catastrophic, just inconvenient. But in a structure like Daniel's, inconvenience is enough. Because what he actually lacks isn't income, it's space. There's no buffer between what he earns and what his life demands. So when something small shifts, everything else has to adjust. And that adjustment rarely comes from reducing the structure. It comes from extending it. A credit card, a payment plan, something to smooth it out just for now. And that's where the system reveals itself. Because the moment you rely on future income to fix a present gap, you've changed the timeline. You're no longer operating in the present. You're borrowing from what hasn't happened yet. And when that becomes a pattern, the structure doesn't just hold you in place. It starts pulling from ahead, quietly, gradually, until the future you were counting on has already been partially spent. This is where the pattern becomes clear. It's not just that Daniel's income disappears. It's how consistently it disappears. Because every time his income increases, something else increases with it. Not randomly, but almost immediately. A slightly better place, a more comfortable option, an upgrade that feels earned. Nothing extreme, just proportional. And that's what makes it invisible. Because it doesn't feel like losing control. It feels like improving your life. Until you look back and realize nothing actually changed. The pressure is the same. The margin is the same. Only the numbers are bigger. And this isn't accidental. Because the system Daniel is inside doesn't resist growth. It adapts to it. It expands just enough to absorb whatever new capacity he creates. So every raise creates space, and that space gets filled before it can stabilize. Not by force, but by expectation. By what feels normal at that level. And once that expectation resets, there's no returning to the previous baseline. So Daniel isn't stuck because he failed to grow. He's stuck because everything around his growth grew with him, at the exact same speed. At this point, Daniel could notice the pattern. He has enough information, enough signals, but there's one thing that keeps everything in place. Everything around him looks the same. His friends live similarly, same type of apartment, same type of car, same routines. They talk about the same pressures, the same expenses, the same feeling that things are tight, but manageable. And that creates something subtle, a reference point. Because if everyone around you is operating the same way, it stops feeling like a problem. It starts feeling normal, even expected. So Daniel doesn't question the structure. He compares within it. And as long as he's not falling behind, it feels like he's doing fine. But that's the trap. Because normalization doesn't mean stability, it means repetition. And when enough people repeat the same pattern, it becomes invisible. Not because it's safe, but because no one steps outside it long enough to see it clearly. And by the time it breaks, it doesn't break individually. It breaks all at once. By now, the pattern isn't random anymore. It's consistent, predictable, repeatable across different people, different incomes, different cities. And when something repeats like that, it's no longer behavior, it's structure. Because Daniel's situation isn't the result of a few poor choices. It's the result of how the environment responds to those choices. An environment where growth is expected, but not allowed to accumulate freely. Where increases in income don't create distance, they create demand. More options, more expectations, more ways to allocate what wasn't there before. And underneath all of it, a system that depends on that behavior continuing. Because spending drives activity. Activity drives growth, and growth requires participation. So the structure doesn't need Daniel to fail. It works best when he succeeds, when he earns more, consumes more, commits more, and stays just stable enough to continue. Not collapsing, not escaping, just cycling. And that's why nothing feels broken, because from the system's perspective, nothing is. It's functioning exactly as intended. And the only reason it feels confusing is because Daniel was never meant to see it as a system in the first place. So this isn't really about cutting expenses or optimizing small decisions, because Daniel could cancel a few subscriptions, he could downgrade a few choices, and it might help temporarily, but it wouldn't change the structure. And that's the difference. Because once you see the pattern, you stop asking, how do I fix this month? And start asking, what is this system turning my life into over time? You begin to notice something else. Not what things cost, but what they commit you to. How much of your future is already spoken for? How little space actually exists between you and the next disruption? And that awareness doesn't instantly solve anything. It doesn't remove the structure. It doesn't erase the commitments. But it changes how you move inside them. You pause differently. You evaluate differently. You stop assuming that more income automatically means more progress, because now you've seen the mechanism. And once you see it, you can't go back to not seeing it. If this shifted the way you think about your own situation, there's more here to explore. Not opinions, patterns. Because the systems shaping your life don't announce themselves. They operate quietly, until you learn how to recognize them.